Anger grows at the government after Tuesday's catastrophic explosion in Beirut. 3 days of national mourning have begun. 137 people are known to have died, with thousands more missing or injured. 16 port officials have been detained.
You know why? Your anger is my source of optimism.
France's President Macron is the first world leader to visit, mobbed by crowds at the port pleading with him for help. The scene at the port is one of utter devastation. You can see here machinery being used to clear some of the wreckage. Let's show you what the port area looked like in June and then today after the explosion. That 2,500 tons of ammonium nitrate blasted open a crater 140 metres wide. The explosion was so intense that it capsized a large passenger ship. You can see it on its side there, almost 500 metres away. Well, the blast began as a small fire, which people in downtown Beirut were watching from their windows. When the chemicals exploded, they received the full force of that blast. This is a photo that's been widely shared. The tweet reading, "The last photo of the firefighters from the Beirut Fire Department. They all lost their lives trying to save us all." Lebanon is a former French colony, and French President Emmanuel Macron is the first foreign leader to visit the country since the disaster. He was mobbed, as you can see, by crowds in Beirut. People were pleading with him to help them and to ensure that those responsible face justice. Let's hear one of the exchanges.
The speaker of the parliament, the British Prime Minister, the President of Lebanon,
I know. I'm not here to help them. I'm here to help you.
I know this is your mission. Listen to us.
Well, compare that welcome to this one. A journalist in Beirut has tweeted, "People chased out Lebanon's Minister of Justice as she went to survey the damage and talk to volunteers helping to clean up debris from the explosion. She was confronted by the people asking, 'Where is the government? When will you hold the corrupt accountable?'" The Lebanese government is accused of widespread corruption, and President Macron has warned today that unless reforms are made, Lebanon will continue to suffer. And he insists aid should be contingent on fundamental political change. Here's a bit of what he said.
I want to meet with all Lebanese political forces for very frank discussions, because beyond the explosion, we know the crisis here is severe. It implies a historic responsibility for the current leaders. This crisis is political, moral, economic and financial, and the primary victim is the Lebanese people. It demands immediate action.
The fact that Lebanon is a former French colony has, of course, affected the way this visit is being interpreted. The world news editor at the Financial Times tweeted this: "Increasingly, this feeling that Macron wants to make sure France is not held responsible for propping up a corrupt and possibly criminal power in Beirut." Also looking at the world news editor at Axios, his tweet, "The immediate reactions to these clips and photos have been fascinating. Some see rare leadership, empathy, courage. Others see arrogance, a colonial mentality. Either way, I really can't imagine any other world leader doing this." Well, France is one of many countries now giving aid to Lebanon, from search teams to doctors and clinical equipment. This plane is from Russia, and it brought in medical personnel and supplies to set up this field hospital. Let's also show you Beirut's St. George's Hospital, badly damaged. At least 4 nurses were killed there. Many of the city's other hospitals are only partly operational, and drug supplies are already running low. Charbel Matar was working in a medical centre in Beirut when the explosion happened, and the damage means he hasn't been able to go back there, but he has been helping people in his local neighbourhood, and says even before the explosion there was a severe shortage of supplies.
In like 2-3 hours after the explosion, we ran out of all the materials, at least the sutures, the needles, the saline, the IV injections, all of these, we ran out of them.
As the clean-up operation continues, the scale of the damage has just become clearer. The BBC's Quentin Sommerville is in Beirut.
We're not far from the epicentre of what really is Lebanon's ground zero. You can get a sense of the enormous force of the detonation of those 2,500 tons of ammonium nitrate, which for about a 2-mile radius directly at the port, destroyed everything. All of those warehouses, everything have been flattened. Those are the grain silos for the country. Something like 85% of Lebanon's grain was stored in there. That yellow stuff is what's left of it. More grain is on the way. And if we just look over there, we can see some ships listing in the water. Now we know that at least one ship has been sunk entirely. It's probably going to take years to salvage that. And you really do get a sense of the enormous cost and the amount of time it will take to rebuild all of this, because this is the neighbourhood of Gemezi. That's the Lebanese electricity board over there. All of its windows gone. And this entire area, these are apartments over here. Look, all of the glass is gone. Something like 300,000 people have now been left homeless. The force of this explosion was such that it isn't just a few broken windows we're talking about here. There's significant structural damage. And for the people living here, it's going to be a very long time before they're able to get home.
We showed you pictures of the clean-up operation at the port earlier, at the spot where heavy machinery has been brought in. Well, on the streets roundabout, residents have had to clean up themselves, and they've been using brooms and shovels. Let's hear from some of them.
I know that everyone of my age invested their effort in this country. Now, look at what's happening. We've gone backwards 100 years.
You can't feel anything in Lebanon. There's nothing to be sad about or to think about. Our country is this way.
Lina Sinjab has also been speaking to residents.
The government said that they're going to, put in £55 million in emergency fund, but it's not enough to cover the need for the people, the need for the devastation in the aftermath of this explosion. Almost 250,000 now are left homeless, and already 70% of the population are living under the poverty line. What the Lebanese want now, they want accountability for their own government, for all the politicians. They're fed up with them, and they want the international community to help them rebuild their country, but not through the government.
We know 16 port officials have now been detained. Before that, officials were placed under house arrest. Meanwhile, others have been speaking out, saying they shouldn't be made scapegoats. One of them, the former Lebanese foreign minister, Gibran Abousil, stood down in January. He has denied knowledge of the storage of ammonium nitrate at the port, saying the blame does lie with officials, not politicians.
Actually, I was never in a direct involvement, not in this government, but even before. But this happened since 6 years, since 2014. So all the consecutive government officials who are directly involved in this matter should be put under thorough investigation, and those responsible should be held accountable, because the negligence part, I'm not talking about the possible attack part, but the negligence part is flagrant by itself. The documents are there. No need to go through the investigation is already clear somehow, because the documents, the evidence, the events, everything is there and clear. The fact of keeping such explosives, 2,750 tons in a civil port like this in the heart of the city is something unacceptable.
Well, just how thousands of tons of explosive chemicals were left to languish in the port of Beirut has yet to be fully explained. Lebanon as a whole, though, is already going through its worst economic crisis since the 15-year civil war ended in 1990, and many people have accused the authorities of corruption, neglect and mismanagement. Here's Caroline Hawley to explain more.
Think of Lebanon and you might think of its beauty, its beaches, the bars and nightlife of Beirut. Or you might think of war, destruction and crisis after crisis. It's a small and complex country with a big heart and some very big problems. To understand the problem, first look at its location. Hemmed in by Israel and Syria, but also looking west across the Mediterranean. Then look at its people, 18 officially recognised religious sects. Power split between Christians and Muslims along sectarian lines. They're dangerous fault lines. For 15 years, between 1975 and 1990, Lebanon tore itself apart.
Tens of thousands packed the roads out of the city to escape the carnage of continuous, indiscriminate shelling.
Beirut became a byword for lawlessness and fear. Warlords and militias ruled the streets. After the war, Lebanon emerged phoenix-like from the ashes, and it became a magnet for investment. But behind the shiny new buildings, the same warlords and their clans remained in power, dominating the government and the economy and basically milking the country dry. And Lebanon's stability hasn't been helped by the Shia militant group Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran and by Syria. It's part of the government and it's in constant tension with Israel and the West, so the West wasn't going to rush in when the economic bubble burst. Street protests broke out when the government tried to raise revenue with new taxes last October. Since then, the economy and the Lebanese currency have been in free fall. People have become desperate, even hungry, and furious at power cuts and a general lack of basic services. And then on top of all of that came coronavirus. Lebanon was on its knees before nearly 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate exploded with such horrifying effect. And people are already blaming their corrupt and incompetent leaders.